And so now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, who is Andrea Coli. And she is the executive director of Lead Bold, an organization committed to empowering and equipping women who minister to reach their full potential in ministry leadership. She has also served as a teaching pastor at CrossWinds Church, an interdenominational church in Livermore, California. And in a former life, she was a professional improviser in Las Vegas. I have to say that is, to me, one of the most fun professions. I don't know if I could do it, but Andrea brings that wit and wisdom to us today as she talks about the adventure and backpack of a leader. So take it away, Andrea.
Well, thank you so much, Susie. I am so excited to be with everyone today. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen here so that we can be together in the moment. So appreciative of what we've already been talking about. So good. I'm excited to be able to add more to these thoughts. Well, as I get started, I want to tell you a word that you probably don't associate with leadership, and the word is backpack. I want you to picture a backpack. I love a good backpack because when I'm carrying one, especially if it's full, it means that I have everything that I need for what I'm doing. I'm prepared for anything. Recently, I went to Disneyland with my daughter who just graduated and her best friend and my best friend, and I had my backpack and it was full. It was full of gum, hand sanitizer, my money, a shirt with sleeves for the evening, hat, sunglasses case, snacks, water, Kleenex, all the things. Now, each person that I went with had a bag of some sort. I could have easily taken out my things and put them in other people's backpacks and not carried my own and avoided the perpetual sweat that ran down my back during the entire 95-degree Anaheim day. But then I wouldn't have been sure that I have everything I need. I love a backpack because I feel prepared, I feel secure. But I also love a metaphorical backpack, and my guess is that you do too. See, every leader comes with a leadership backpack, and this is a leadership backpack. It's something that we as leaders, we spend our time, our years really, filling. And we fill it with things like our talents and hard-earned skills and tried and true strategies that we've learned along the way for managing well, building strong teams. We fill it with our values. And we also fill it with the less definable things like our potential and our opportunities and our people, the people on our teams and in our spheres. The leadership backpack, it also holds our failures, or at least the lessons that we've learned from them, and it holds our achievements. The leadership backpack holds all the resources you use to be the unique leader that you are. And the more full your bag, the more equipped you are to lead well. And we bring this leadership backpack into every meeting, every project, every conversation. And in fact, we bring the leadership backpack into our relationships, into our marriages, into our parenting. For those of you with kids, do you ever find yourself treating your kids like one of your employees? Like you're just doling out leadership strategy when they're just kind of trying to share their day. My younger daughter is 13, and she was sharing some frustration about a group project at school and about the one kid who didn't do any of the work. And I immediately go into leader mode, like, you know what you're going to find as you get older is there's always someone you work with who doesn't seem to pull their weight. And what I'd suggest, and then immediately her eyes glaze over and she's like, Mom, we already turned in the project. I don't really care anymore. So whether or not anyone's listening to our leadership wisdom, our backpacks are there at the ready with our friends, with our own parents, with our coworkers. This is all par for the course. The problem happens when we as leaders bring that backpack into our relationship with God. Because when we can do that, it causes us to miss out on what God has for us. And getting real specific, when I say our relationship with God, I mean the part that is personal, intimate, the just you and Jesus space. It's your private spiritual life, the place where you best connect with and commune with God on a personal level, not necessarily as a leader. I won't go into a long list of what that looks like. It's different for everyone. But when we bring the backpack to that one-on-one time with God, it diminishes our ability to receive some really specific things that God has for us, the things that God uses to fill us up so that we can be the best leader we can be. If you've ever gone through a season where you have felt spiritually depleted and unable to receive what God has for you and what you need from Him, it might be that something in your backpack is in the way. Now, there's all sorts of things in our backpack that could be the cause, but today I want to just look at two things that most often hinder us. And these are our failures and our wins. Now, while failures and wins are certainly a necessary aspect of leadership and maybe a lot of what makes us stronger as leaders, they can be obstacles in our relationship with God. Tim Keller gets at this idea when he says this: if our identity is in our work, our backpack, rather than Christ, success will go to our heads and failure will go to our hearts. And yes, of course, we get this. It resonates with us. We know it's true. We know that our failures don't define us and they can't change who we are in Christ. And we know that our leadership wins, our successes, our achievements. They don't make God love us any more than He already does. This is nothing new. In fact, understanding these two truths is pretty essential to the Christian faith. There's no sin too big for Jesus, and we can't earn grace. As people of faith, we believe this, and yet we still hold tightly to both our wins and our failures. And why is that? Why do we keep showing up to our relationship with Jesus with these things from our backpacks? Well, I think it's because leadership is all about success and failures. It's the goals, whether or not they've been accomplished. It's the scoreboard, the benchmarks. We are highly aware of when we're winning and when we're missing the mark, because that's what good leaders do. But this mindset is hurting us when it comes to our interior relationship with God. So as we talk for a few minutes about what that looks like, can I encourage you to pay attention to which of these things might be blocking you? Listen for how God might want your attention when it comes to your backpack. So let's talk about the first one, our failures. Now, it doesn't take long for any of us to identify the places we failed. This is kind of rule number one of leadership. You are going to fail. According to Nancy, you are going to apologize. That's good. But it's what we do with that failure that matters, right? It's how we take it and grow from it. So there's nothing wrong with having failure in your backpack. But when you carry it spiritually, when you can't let go or get past, it can cause you to miss out on grace that God has for you. Let me give you a hypothetical scenario that may or may not be based on a true story. So say there's a pastor, we'll call him Sam, and during this pandemic, he has lost a lot of his staff, and now he's needing to build that back up. And so he's done some hiring real quick though. And so even though when he saw some characteristics that would have normally given him pause, he kind of overlooked them. He felt a little desperate. Well, now it's a few months later, and he's realizing that two of the new hires aren't working out. And so he does the tough thing, and he has honest conversations with both of them, and they both end up leaving. And to him, this failure is a big deal. It hurt the momentum of his team, and he lost some trust with his staff. And maybe if this were his only misstep, he could get over it. But the truth is, throughout the pandemic, he's felt like he hasn't been leading well. This was just one more bad decision. Okay, so for Sam, on a personal level, on a spiritual level, this failure is becoming part of his false narrative about who he is. It's getting into his heart, like Tim Keller says. And he continues to feel more and more defeated. And because Sam is holding on to that failure spiritually, it's preventing him from coming to Jesus just as Sam, not failure Sam, just Sam. But if he were able to empty himself of the distraction of that failure, then he would be open to be able to receive comfort and guidance and renewed sustenance from God. See, holding our fails distracts us from his new life in us. The Spirit has an unending supply of new life in us. It is grace that we receive over and over. Like Bruce talked about, the particles, all the particles of grace in our environment. And I believe that the Spirit wants to breathe new life in you, but maybe there's a failure that you're holding on to that's hindering you from receiving it. Because when we hold tight to those failures, they start to define us, or at least we think they do. They get in our heart. They become part of our false narrative. And when we bring that false narrative to our experience with Jesus, we might miss out on the fresh anointing of new life that he has for us. So let me ask you, is there a failure that you're holding on to that's maybe getting in the way of Jesus being able to breathe his new life in you? Well, we're going to talk about what you do if that's the case. But first, let's get to the other thing in our leadership backpacks that often in the way, our wins. Now, as leaders, especially as leaders, we tend to wear our wins on our sleeves because, being successful is what we do as leaders. It's part of why we're leaders in the first place. And if we're not winning a lot of the time, how are we supposed to inspire the people we lead, right? I mean, we all want to look up to and be inspired by someone who's good at what they do. It's why we love watching professional sports or the Olympics. It's why Broadway is the pinnacle of actors, because it's the best. It's why I was willing to pay exorbitant prices to traipse around a theme park whose mascot is a mouse, because Disney is winning at family fun. Each of us is winning at something. We all have unique and important skills that we bring to this world. And these are the places where our leadership shines. But at the end of the day, it all harkens back to a performance mindset. And that can be so detrimental in our spiritual lives. See, our wins are what prove to everyone around us that we're good enough, that we deserve what we have, that we're legitimate. It's the necessary of evil of leadership. But it's a slippery slope because it can easily shift into trying to prove to God that we're good enough. In other words, winning kind of can give us this false sense that in some way we have proven ourselves to God through how we're behaving. As a first grader, I went to something called Awana. When you're little, young, it's called Sparkies, and you were given a vest. And then through memorizing Bible verses, you would receive crowns and jewels. And so here I am in this picture toting my Awana is amazing. It's an incredible organization where I will say that probably 90% of the Bible that I know in my heart is from those years. But for me, it became all about the bling, like proving I could get it all. So I worked hard for the jewels and the crowns and the patches and the icons and the bars, and ultimately this big plaque that said that I had earned all the things. I got so good at being good that I grew into someone who believed that my good performance was one of the things that God really liked about me, maybe even expected of me. But these wins of mine, that got in the way of me embracing God's deep, abiding love for me that has no requirements. See, holding our wins distracts us from his unconditional love of us. If part of our false narrative is that our wins make us even 1 ounce more lovable, more acceptable, or just plain better, then we can't fully embrace God's unconditional love for us. In your life right now, are you holding a little too tightly to a win that's getting in the way of you being able to perceive and receive God's unconditional love of you? Well, I can say with utmost confidence that not a single one of us has exhausted all the good things that God has to give us. He is an uncontainable God with a bottomless supply of grace and love. But for some of us, the failures that we're holding are preventing us from a renewal of life that God has for us. And for others of us, it's our good performance that's muddying our ability to experience the unconditionalness of God's love. So we've got to figure out how to release both of these things in our backpacks when it comes to our relationship with God. And so I want to just spend our last minute or two with some practical ways to do that. Many of you are familiar with this verse in Hebrews in the New Testament. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, so we can run with perseverance. That phrase there that says throw off, it literally means to put aside. And so what we've got to do is we have to figure out how to put aside our fails and our wins. And there's no one right way to do it. I want to give you a few ideas, but let me say this is not an exhaustive list. I encourage you to experiment, figure out what works for you, get creative. But here's a few ideas to start with. Some people really appreciate having a physical motion or physical representation. This sounds corny, but maybe going through the physical steps of taking off a backpack, or maybe putting on a real backpack and taking it off and setting it aside when you come to Jesus, or even just print a picture of a backpack and set it on the other side of the room. Others of you, it would help to come to it with prayer, a prayer of intention, that you are intending to set these things aside. Others of you, it might be helpful to write down very specifically, what is the fail? What is the win that I'm holding? And then literally take that paper and set it aside. Maybe you need to verbalize what you're holding on to with a trusted friend, a spouse, maybe a spiritual director. Again, these are just ideas. The point isn't how you set it aside. The point is that you do. And I believe that in that is where the hope is. Because if we have fails getting in the way of all that God has for us, here's the hope. Every time we can throw that off, God is there to fill you with new life. And for those of us who've been striving and depending on wins for some kind of like extra credit, spiritually speaking, there's hope for that too, because God's love does not fail. And it's based on him and not us. It is rich. You carry a leader's backpack and you have faithfully been filling it. And chances are it served you well. But when it comes to your inner life with God, setting aside both your fails and your wins will free you up to receive all that God has for you so that you can live and lead better.
Thank you, Andrea. Wow. What a great image for leaders. And I just, you expanded our minds thinking about how we actually carry our wins around and they get in the way. That's incredible. I just really appreciate that. And we'll circle back with you on the speaker panel when we come to that in just a few minutes.